Are you looking for some more Chopin to learn? Well, his B minor waltz is a delightful little waltz to play, and of course is a very popular encore with concert pianists. So today, let me share some tips and ideas of how you might go about practicing it. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. Hi, this is Tommy with Tommy's Piano Corner, the place for returning pianists, or indeed anybody who loves the piano, to share tips and ideas of how to get the best from this great hobby. If it is your first trip here, then please do think about subscribing. Simply hit the little icon in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen now, and it's all done for you. Chopin, of course, wrote a number of waltzes, and so far I've done tutorials on 3 of them already. And his B minor waltz is actually classified by Henley at level 4, which is at the bottom end of medium, as they call it, so sort of intermediate if you like. And that makes it very accessible to a lot of us. Equally, because it is such a popular encore with concert pianists, there are lots and lots of really good recordings of it to listen to. In terms of techniques we can develop with this, then there are some double thirds and, reasonably fast repeated notes in the right hand. The left hand's fairly lively and leaps around the piano quite a lot. And the right hand, if we're very careful about our fingering, we can largely join this note for note. So it's also a very interesting study on different types of fingering to use. As with the A-flat waltz, there are a few different versions of this around, so don't be surprised if the score you've got isn't exactly the same as the way I'll play it here or the score I'll show you here. There are different versions, as I say, but fundamentally they're largely the same. As always, let's start off with the structure, okay? As you might guess by the title, it's in B minor, and of course it's in 3/4 time. It has essentially 4 parts to it. There's a first theme, a second theme, a third theme that's actually in B major, and then there's a 4th part, which is basically a clever combination of the first and second themes. As is often the case with Chopin's waltzes, there's also a reasonably large amount of repeated material. If you look at, say, the first section, so bars 1 to 32, bars 17 to 28 are the same as bars 1 to 12. So in effect, of the 32 bars, this first section, there are only 20 containing unique material. You'll find a similar situation in the remaining sections, with there effectively being only 2 new bars in the 4th section, which are bars 97 and 144. I think the reason this is so helpful to us is that, for me at least, it's the kind of waltz that I'm going to basically have to play from memory and not from the music. And so the less there is to remember, the better. Now, the reason that, for me at least anyway, I say this is worth memorising is because, I'll be honest with you, I don't think I could control that left hand properly if I didn't keep my eyes firmly on it. And therefore, if I needed to keep looking up at the music to remind myself what I needed to play, it would just become too messy. It's not like, say Moonlight Sonata, the slow movement, where your hands aren't playing that many notes, they're not moving around so much. So if you do need to keep looking up at the music, you've got plenty of time to find your place and plenty of time to look back down again. So that's the kind of piece that maybe I wouldn't necessarily try to memorize, but this one I would. I'd also say memorize this as you go. Don't try to practice all the notes first and then come back and memorize them later. Memorize each tiny fragment as you move forward with it. And to help the process throughout the tutorial, I'll give you little snippets of things that I notice that help the memorization process slightly easier. Because of course, when you've got very similar material appearing in several places, it can be quite tricky to remember which version to use where. As usual, I recommend that we start by the ending, which in this case is in fact almost identical to the beginning. Then we can further break this down into 3 practice subsections: bars 97 to 112, bars 113 to 126, and then bars 127 to the end. Believe it or not, Once we've mastered these bars, then we pretty much have learned the first two sections for free, as they contain almost identical material. Starting with the first subsection then, let's think about what we have in the left hand. This is basically a bass note, followed by two chords. Mostly, as you can see, these chords are the same note, but not always. And the first thing we need to do is pay very close attention to where they differ and how. And this is my first tip in memorizing. If we look at bar 99, it's basically an F#7 chord with an A# in the bass. However, looking closely, our first chord has F#, C# and E, whilst the second is F#, A# and E. So our hand position doesn't need to change, just the active fingers that will play the notes. Now let's compare that to bar 104, where we have exactly the same chord, but over B natural in the bass. However, when we look at bar 107, we have those chords the opposite way round, over an F# in the bass. So I marked my score with a U where the middle note was going up and an inverted U where the middle note was going down as an obvious sort of visual note to self. Next, let's think about the melody. Given that our eyes will almost certainly be focused on our left hand, ideally we want to make sure that the right hand can find its way all alone without needing help from our eyes. The score I have has a fairly good fingering scheme that I've only modified slightly here and there, mainly to fit my hands better. I recommend you start with whatever fingering is given in the copy you have and work from there. I find it helpful to work out my fingering hands separately wherever it doesn't feel instinctive. One fingering that I did find helpful in bar 110 was to finish on 3 in the right hand, so that the following G is more comfortable to reach. Then I recommend practicing it hands together, but in 2 bars and a beat snippets, mostly starting from the last beat of the previous bar, given the way the music is frequently phrased in this way. Doing it in this way should enable you to commit it to memory fairly quickly, as well as get used to the notes under your fingers. Practice in a variety of ways too, without the pedal, with the pedal. Emphasize the bass note. Emphasize the first of the 2 chords. The aim is to get it really secure. Then expand those snippets as 4-bar groups. So we'll say, for example, bars 97 to 100, 101 to 104, and so forth. Before you play each snippet, even though I said we're trying to memorize this, do take a look at the music. As you play each one, ask yourself, did I have even the remotest hesitation as to what notes I need to play? I'd even go as far as to say don't go any further until you can get this entire subsection confidently. Now let's move to the second subsection of this 4th section and do the same as we did last time. First, let's look closely at the left hand. As we can see in bar 115, we have an A7 chord where the left hand plays first A, C# and G, and then A, E and G. So I mark this with my U. Bar 123 has exactly the same pattern. Now ensure you contrast these with bars 117 and 125, where we have the same A7 chord, but played without modifying the interior note of the chord. In bar 121, we have our F#7 chord again, this time with the left hand playing the C# with the first chord and the A# with the second, so I mark this with my inverted U. The only other little different detail we need to really think about is in bar 120, where the left hand chord actually changes, with the interior note dropping from C# to B natural. Then again, work through your right hand fingering before starting in 2-bar snippets, hands together. The third subsection is by far, for me at least, the trickiest, especially the right hand. So let's start with that. There are a few places where the Chopin-esque fingering can be used, as I like to call it, and I find it works very well. Here we can effectively pass 5 under 4, which helps us to end on the right finger when we get to the bottom. It works well in bars 131 and bar 137. If you're unfamiliar with this type of fingering, it's worth spending some time getting used to how it feels. Study the left hand pattern as the same way as we did elsewhere, paying particular attention to wherever the usual pattern is altered. So here you can see bars 127, 128, 139, 142, 143 and 144. Now start with the 2-bar snippets again and work through this. Of course, don't forget to start adding these subsections together too as you master them. So you can add the first and second, then the second and third, and of course eventually all 3. Next, I move on to that third theme, which is in B major. Now here, on the whole, we don't really have changes in terms of the way the chords are in the left hand. However, that F#7 chord, we do need to be a little careful because Chopin tends to use slightly different notes here and there with it. A useful memorization signpost I found was that generally, if for example you have a C# in the right hand, you'll have the A# in the left hand, as you have in bar 72. Or if we have the A# in the right hand, such as in bar 90, then the left hand will play the C#. I found it very helpful to take note of this. However, the major difficulty here is the right hand, which has repeated notes and of course double thirds. Let's start with the repeated notes. As I'm sure you've heard, it's generally good practice not to play repeated notes with the same finger. So we change finger each time we repeat the note. Now these first appear in bars 69 to 72 and then again in bars 77 to 80. When practicing these, I found it very helpful to pay particular attention to the hand position, as ideally we want to play the white keys from the thicker part of the key rather than in between the keys as we change fingers. This means we might need to build an in and out movement. These are just tiny adjustments, but very helpful. The most effective way I found to practice this particular section was my 4/4 waltz technique, and I loop through the 4-bar snippets in each of the 3 different variants. Using each variant as I described in my video in this technique gives us a tiny pause to gather our thoughts as we execute the repeated notes and ultimately makes them more secure. Do the same then for bars 77 to 80. As a note, we also have repeated chords in bars 85 to 88, where we can also change fingers as we play, so make sure you work through these in the same way. For the double thirds, I found that with my smaller hands, alignment is important. Ensuring a flexible pivot of the wrist really helps, especially when moving to the third played with 3 and 5. Again, I found the 4/4 waltz technique the best way to practice these. As an extra tip, I found that for those where Chopin started to modulate us back to B minor, so in bars 89 and 91, it helps to move the hand again away from the fallboard for the final 2 sets of double thirds, as it gets the hand in a better position to play the A# G natural dyad. Before we do move on to the first and second sections, I just want to take a moment to dwell on the notion of the fingering choices we have here. Now, Rami Bar-Niv, in his excellent book, The Art of Piano Fingering, talks about a hierarchy of things we need to bear in mind when choosing the fingering we want to use. And the first of these is always the musical result we want to be able to achieve. Therefore, when you're deciding which fingering to use, make sure you also take into account the phrasing that you want to get from that fingering. Let me show you what I mean with the fingering recommended by my score for bars 93 and 94. As you can see here, it recommends a change of finger in accordance with the phrase marks. Sure, you could easily play these without bothering to change fingers, and perhaps this is easier for the brain to understand, which is incidentally the lowest priority on Rami's fingering hierarchy I mentioned earlier. However, we'll get a much better musical result much more easily by changing fingers. So make our brains work that little bit harder. That said, of course, don't feel that you always have to do this. There will be occasions where it certainly doesn't suit your hand to need to do that. All that means then is that we'll need to work a little harder to get the musical result we want with the fingering we're going to need to use. So then that leaves just the first and second sections, and I'm actually not really going to go into them in any detail at all in this tutorial. As I said at the beginning of this tutorial, one of the beauties of this piece is that once we've learned the fourth section, we've effectively got pretty much all of sections 1 and 2 for free. There are just a few different things that we need to connect. There's a couple of bars where the left hand changes, but otherwise it's all the same material. So if you have worked diligently through the other sections that we've talked about, you're pretty much there. It's just a case now of making those few extra mental connections and bringing this back up to performance standard. If you're not already, then please do subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner. Don't forget to hit the little bell icon so you're notified of new videos as and when they're released. I thank you very much for watching and look forward to seeing you very soon.